Once again, welcome to our Coping with COVID-19 series for parents. This is our attempt to support our parents that are kind of locked down right now with their kids. And one of the things that's interesting, I remember as a parent, Diane, of my two sons, is on occasion, they would do something that I would get very angry over or triggered by. It almost like I was a bit out of control. I'd see that, and again, for me, one of the big values I was taught as a kid was respect. So when my kids were disrespectful, I would really just have a major reaction to it and realize that I didn't even understand why I did that.
Right. It was unconscious almost.
It was almost unconscious, and I remember going, why is that such a big deal for me? Why am I so upset? And of course, I know we all say, I'll never do that to my kids, what was done to us, but we often find out that we do. And that tells me there's something inside of me as a parent that's being triggered. Can you give us some insight about what that's like for parents in terms of why that happens and some background information?
Yeah, we kind of think we're all living in the present, but we're not. Because,
interesting.
Yeah, our past history of being a child and growing up and what happened during that time remains within us, and it often impacts how we think and feel and react. And like you're saying, that reaction is so deep inside, we're not doing it at all consciously. But we're having almost a visceral response to something, and like, where did that come from? So I think, and people's histories and what they learned and all, you don't even sometimes have the memories, actually, of what happened to you growing up, especially earlier on. You don't get conscious memories going until we'll talk about this at some point, but when the part of the brain called the hippocampus comes online, where you can really have thinking memories. Before that, another part of the brain called the amygdala stores the sensory memories that you have. And so you have a lot of those in place inside of you without even knowing them. So without your permission, things like that are going to happen, and you're going to have these really strong reactions and say or do things or be repelled by something, and it's probably because of something that happened in your past. So it's a legacy that gets passed on to you. And often it's transgenerational. It can go back multiple generations.
So it's all throughout my family over time. So it could be from great-grandparents to my parents to me, right?
Yep.
That's
the story that we tell to explain this is a husband and wife got married, and very happily married, and he was so proud of her, and she was a wonderful cook. Except that one day, he noticed that every Sunday she insisted that they have roast beef. And not only did they have to have roast beef, she would buy a piece of roast beef, and when she got it home, she'd cut a big chunk of it off and throw it in the trash, and then go ahead and cook the roast beef.
Strange.
And he didn't want to criticize her, but he said, honey, that we could eat that piece. Why do you cut it off and throw it away? And she said, because that's the way you cook roast beef. And he didn't want to argue with her, so he just went, oh, that's odd. So he waited, and there was a family reunion that he went to, and he thought, I'm going to find out where this started. So he went to her mother and quietly pulled her aside and said, oh, your daughter is such a great cook. I just have a question. Why every Sunday we have to have roast beef, and every Sunday she cuts a big chunk off and throws it away? And the mother said, that is how you cook roast beef. And he was like, okay. So he went to the grandmother and he asked the same question. And guess what? She said the same thing. The great-grandmother, God bless her, was sitting in a rocking chair. And he thought, oh, I'll just give one more try. So he went over to her and he said, great-grandmother, I love, the whole family here. And I just have this one question. And he went through the whole story. She cuts the meat off and she throws it away. And the grandmother went, huh, wow. Because he was waiting for that's the way you cook roast beef. And she said, you know what? When I got married, we were so poor. We hardly ever had good meat. But we were living above a butcher shop. And the butcher very kindly at the end of the day on Sundays would give me a nice big piece of roast beef. But the problem was I didn't have a pan big enough to cook the roast beef in. So I always had to cut a big chunk off. And we didn't have refrigeration in those days, so I'd have to throw it away, and that's the way you cook roast beef. And that is a story of a legacy that went through the generations with people doing something automatically and not knowing why they did it.
So how does that relate now to I see my children doing something and I have this internal reaction that I seemingly can't feel like I can control?
Chances are excellent if it's that, if you step back and go, I have no idea why I just did that. It's probably like that. It's probably, if you go back in your history and ask, if you can, parents and grandparents something about that, they may end up being able to tell you a story. Everything has to come from somewhere. I think that's, I don't know, somebody said that.
So things like anger, things like fear,
Yeah,
things that could be very destructive, it may be something that
From your past.
has been in my family for decades,
right.
and I'm actually reliving that, I'm actually doing that,
Yes.
and
And you have
certain
this-
loyalty to the family.
I was about to say that. You
Right.
have this, we have a loyalty to our family's legacies. And it's as if we're talking about respect. We are disrespecting our family if we're disloyal to what was given to us. That's why it's so hard to teach parenting, because it goes against what people have learned and been told is the way you do this. That's the way you do it. And so if you come along and you do it differently, I can remember very clearly how I was criticized for rocking and holding and cuddling my children, my babies, because in the early 1900s, people were taught, you're spoiling them. You're picking up a child who's crying. You shouldn't be rocking them. Well, it turns out that generations before, that's what you were taught. Put them on a schedule. It turns out that that's really bad advice. The whole crying it out thing is not good for children. But the pull for parents is to do what was done to them and what it is that they heard because they don't want to disrespect or be disloyal to their parents. There is a way around it.
Okay. What's the way around it?
I got this from listening to Yvonne Bourget-Ménage, who was the person who created a whole model for how to understand us, our human nature.
And I'm glad I don't have to spell that. So
I'm glad I don't have to say it again, and I'm not spelling it either because that's but it's contextual therapy, and he talked about because he wrote a book called Invisible Loyalties, and talked a lot about this and how it's implanted in us. And he was one of my professors and supervisor, and one of the things that he taught was that if you help parents understand that their parents were doing the best job that they could, but they didn't have the information you now have. If they had had that information, they would have done it differently. It's like, how do you break through? So one of the beautiful things about the neuroscience that's now just taking off all over the place is that you can point to things and help parents see your parents did it the best they could, but that's because they didn't have what you now have. If they'd had it, they would have done it differently. I'll give you one example. How often when babies are getting shots, you go into the doctor's office, and sometimes the doctors will just say, lay the baby on the table and we'll give the baby the shot. And what happens when a baby gets a shot? They scream, right? Well, they did some testing of children that were laid down to get their shots and children whose parents held them and snuggled with them, and they got their shot. Both children screamed at the same volume, but they tested through saliva the amount of cortisol that was being released. The babies that were laying with no one holding them, especially a beloved parent, had huge amounts of cortisol. The babies that were being held had almost none. So if a parent knows that and is but has been told, no, don't baby that child, don't cuddle a child for a vaccination or something like that, to learn to be able to say, wait a minute, nobody knew this before. Now we know it. Now we can do it. It helps to break that bind that we're in, that we have to be loyal to things.
So really, one of the things that we need to have as parents is permission to say, hey, I want to evaluate my reaction and what I'm saying, feeling, and doing against what's been true in my family. And if it's really an unhealthy response, give ourselves permission to say, I don't have to do that.
Exactly.
And not to blame or shame anybody that gave me those beliefs or mental models,
Right.
but to say, I can change this now
Right.
and break the legacy that may have been destructive.
Right.
So,
And Nash said one of the things you have to learn that you're going to have to survive is the guilt that you feel.
right,
That a piece of this is going to be waves of guilt while you work through the loyalty issues.
Okay.
That's a part of it, because we feel like we're somehow betraying the sacred trust of something passed down through the generations. So that's going to be a natural response.
right. Well, we just about bordered on therapy in that moment, so there we are going down a whole road.
Sorry.
But anyway, I think it's very, very helpful for us as parents, particularly when we're confined by the issues around us with COVID-19, to understand that some of the things that are going on are right inside of us, and we're very loyal to them because of our family legacies. And we have to begin to understand that and give ourselves permission to assess that, evaluate that, and come up with our own sense of what we should be doing as parents and why those reactions are there. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Diane.
Can I add one more thing?
She's got to add one more thing, so go right
That's
ahead.
what I'm going to say. In this time of the extra anxiety of what's happening in homes and all that, all of this is going to get heightened.
Okay,
It's going to be a much greater pull, and we're going to be more reflexive in our parenting
right,
if we don't slow it down a little bit.
right. Good point.
Well, thank you.
And with that, we will close, and thank you for joining us for this series, and we hope we'll be seeing you again very soon.